I think he's doing some good things. Mostly, he's acting on his instincts, which are not good.
Burt Reynolds wasn't just Hollywood's quintessential leading man. He was its most brutally honest critic, never hesitating to express his disdain for actors he considered pretentious, overrated, or simply irritating. With his trademark mustache and devil-may-care charm, Reynolds dominated the box office throughout the 1970s and 1980s, but his success came with a razor-sharp tongue that spared no one in the industry. Unlike many stars who diplomatically navigated Hollywood politics, Reynolds wore his animosities like badges of honor, turning professional disagreements into legendary feuds. Reynolds' conflicts weren't merely personal vendettas. They represented deeper philosophical battles about what constituted authentic screen presence and legitimate acting technique. His antagonisms towards certain actors exposed the fault lines running through Hollywood's transition from classical studio system glamour to the grittier, more psychologically complex cinema of the 1970s. These weren't just personality clashes, but artistic manifestos delivered through calculated insults and behind-the-scenes warfare. Jon Voight. The animosity between Burt Reynolds and Jon Voight ignited during the filming of Deliverance, where their contrasting approaches to acting created a creative battleground that would define both their careers. Reynolds, the former football player turned charming rogue, found himself paired with Voight, the classically trained method actor whose intense preparation rituals and psychological excavation techniques represented everything Reynolds considered pretentious about contemporary acting. Jon treated every scene like he was performing King Lear at Lincoln Center, Reynolds later told Playboy magazine. Meanwhile, I'm trying to make a movie that people might actually want to watch. Director John Boorman found himself mediating between two fundamentally different philosophies of screen presence. Voight's approach involved extensive character research and emotional preparation, while Reynolds relied on instinct, natural charisma, and what he called honest reaction. Cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond recalled that Burt would watch Jon go through these elaborate preparation rituals and just shake his head. He'd mutter things like, "We're making an adventure movie, not performing brain surgery." The tension reached its peak during the famous river sequences, where Voight's insistence on multiple takes for emotional authenticity clashed with Reynolds' preference for capturing spontaneous moments. Voight made acting look like work, Reynolds reflected years later. "I always believed that if the audience could see you acting, you were doing it wrong." Ryan O'Neal. Burt Reynolds' contempt for Ryan O'Neal stemmed from what he perceived as O'Neal's unearned success and superficial approach to dramatic material. Both actors occupied similar territory as leading men in romantic dramas during the 1970s, but Reynolds viewed O'Neal as a pretty boy pretender who coasted on looks rather than developing genuine screen presence. Ryan got handed roles that should have gone to actors who understood what it meant to carry a picture, Reynolds told Rolling Stone. He had the face for romance, but none of the soul that makes audiences actually care about what happens to your character. Their rivalry intensified when both actors were considered for high-profile romantic leads, with O'Neal often winning roles that Reynolds felt better suited his own combination of ruggedness and vulnerability. Casting director Marion Dougherty, who worked with both actors, recalled that Burt would openly question how Ryan kept getting these dramatic parts when he seemed to approach every role with the same bland sensitivity. There was real professional jealousy there, but also genuine artistic frustration. The animosity became particularly bitter when O'Neal's performance in Love Story earned critical acclaim and massive box office success. Reynolds publicly dismissed the film as manipulative garbage designed to make teenage girls cry, but industry insiders recognized his comments as thinly veiled resentment. Producer Robert Evans noted that Burt couldn't understand how Ryan's one-note performance became this cultural phenomenon while his own more dynamic work in action films was dismissed as mere entertainment. O'Neal proved that in Hollywood, looking sensitive was more important than actually being talented, Reynolds later reflected with characteristic bluntness. Dustin Hoffman. Burt Reynolds' antagonism toward Dustin Hoffman represented a fundamental clash between populist entertainment and intellectual artistry that defined Hollywood's cultural divide in the 1970s. Reynolds viewed Hoffman as the epitome of pretentious method acting, an actor who transformed every commercial project into an excuse for psychological self-exploration at the expense of audience enjoyment. Dustin treated making movies like he was conducting sociology experiments, Reynolds complained to Esquire magazine. He'd spend hours discussing his character's childhood trauma for a scene that required him to order coffee. Their philosophical differences became apparent when both actors were considered for similar roles requiring everyman appeal combined with dramatic depth. Reynolds felt that Hoffman's neurotic intensity and deliberate ordinariness represented a rejection of traditional movie star qualities that audiences actually craved. Producer David Begelman recalled that Burt genuinely couldn't understand Hoffman's appeal. He'd say things like, "Why would anyone pay $10 to watch a guy who looks like their accountant have nervous breakdowns?" The conflict deepened when Hoffman's performances in films like The Graduate and Kramer vs. Kramer earned critical acclaim that Reynolds felt was undeserved. Reynolds publicly dismissed Hoffman's approach as navel-gazing disguised as serious acting, arguing that true screen presence required charisma and larger-than-life qualities that couldn't be manufactured through technique alone. Director Sidney Pollack, who worked with both actors on separate projects, noted that Burt represented old Hollywood's belief that stars should be aspirational figures, while Dustin embodied the new idea that actors should reflect ordinary people's struggles. Hoffman convinced people that being boring was the same thing as being deep, Reynolds concluded with typical directness. Robert Redford. The rivalry between Burt Reynolds and Robert Redford represented one of Hollywood's most fascinating studies in contrasting approaches to leading man status, with Reynolds harboring deep resentment toward what he perceived as Redford's effortless success and critical favoritism. Both actors occupied similar territory as charismatic leading men, but Reynolds felt that Redford's golden boy image and establishment connections allowed him to be taken seriously as an artist, while Reynolds was dismissed as mere entertainment. Bob got to be both a movie star and a serious actor without ever having to choose, Reynolds told Vanity Fair. The critics treated him like he was doing Shakespeare when he was basically playing the same charming guy in every picture. Reynolds' frustrations stemmed from their parallel career trajectories, where Redford consistently received the prestige projects and critical acclaim that Reynolds craved. Producer Ray Stark, who worked with both actors, recalled that Burt would openly question why Bob's performances were considered nuanced, while his own work was labeled as one-dimensional. There was genuine professional jealousy mixed with artistic frustration. The animosity intensified when both actors were considered for the same high-profile roles, with Redford often winning parts that Reynolds felt better showcased his range and screen presence. The conflict extended beyond professional competition to their different relationships with Hollywood's power structure. Reynolds viewed Redford as the beneficiary of East Coast intellectual snobbery that automatically elevated certain types of performances over others. Director George Roy Hill, who worked extensively with Redford, noted that Burt genuinely believed that Bob's success was partly due to looking like what critics thought a serious actor should look like, while his own more blue-collar appeal was held against him. Al Pacino. Burt Reynolds' disdain for Al Pacino represented a fundamental disagreement about what constituted authentic masculine screen presence, with Reynolds viewing Pacino's intense method approach as theatrical self-indulgence that served the actor's ego more than the story. Reynolds, who built his career on effortless charm and natural charisma, found Pacino's volcanic preparation rituals and psychological excavation techniques to be pretentious displays that distracted from genuine storytelling. Al turned every role into a one-man show about Al Pacino's acting process. Reynolds complained to The Hollywood Reporter, "Audiences came to see characters, not to watch some guy work through his personal demons on screen." Their philosophical divide reflected broader industry tensions about the evolution of American masculinity in cinema. Reynolds represented classical Hollywood's confident, accessible leading man, while Pacino embodied the new Hollywood's psychologically complex, emotionally volatile anti-hero. Director Sidney Lumet, who worked with both actors on different projects, observed that Burt saw Al's intensity as manufactured drama, While Al probably viewed Burt's approach as superficial crowd-pleasing, the conflict became particularly pronounced when both actors were considered for roles requiring working-class authenticity, with their contrasting interpretations of blue-collar masculinity highlighting their artistic differences. Reynolds publicly mocked Pacino's preparation methods, describing them as elaborate rituals designed to convince observers that difficult acting was automatically superior acting. Producer Martin Bregman recalled that Burt would do these exaggerated impressions of Al's pre-scene rituals, complete with the mumbling and the pacing. The conflict revealed Reynolds' complex relationship with his own artistic ambitions and his resentment toward actors who received critical validation for techniques he considered unnecessarily complicated. Pacino convinced people that shouting was the same thing as acting, Reynolds later reflected. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is just be yourself up there, but that's apparently not dramatic enough for some people. Marlon Brando. Burt Reynolds' relationship with Marlon Brando represented the most complex and psychologically revealing of all his professional antagonisms, combining genuine reverence for Brando's revolutionary impact on screen acting with bitter resentment toward his later career choices and dismissive attitude toward the craft that made him legendary. Reynolds, like virtually every actor of his generation, acknowledged Brando's foundational influence on naturalistic screen performance, but he became increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as Brando's contemptuous approach to projects and disrespectful treatment of collaborators. Marlon created the template for honest acting, then spent the rest of his career making a mockery of it, Reynolds told People magazine. He proved that you could be the greatest actor who ever lived and still be completely unprofessional. The complexity of Reynolds' feelings toward Brando reflected his own artistic insecurities and unfulfilled ambitions. Reynolds desperately wanted the kind of critical respect that Brando commanded, but he also resented Brando's apparent indifference to the commercial entertainment that Reynolds excelled at providing. Director Francis Ford Coppola, who worked with Brando and knew Reynolds professionally, noted that Burt was simultaneously intimidated by Marlon's legend and infuriated by his waste of that gift. It represented everything Burt wanted to achieve and everything he promised himself he'd never become. The antagonism intensified when stories emerged about Brando's unprepared performances and demanding behavior on sets, which Reynolds viewed as disrespectful to the collaborative nature of filmmaking. Producer Robert Evans recalled that Burt would go into these rants about how Marlon was destroying the credibility of serious acting by treating every project like it was beneath him. There was real moral outrage there, mixed with professional jealousy. Reynolds felt that Brando's casual attitude toward his legendary talent represented a betrayal of the craft that had elevated acting from mere entertainment to legitimate art form. Reynolds' Feuds exposed Hollywood's tensions between entertainment and art, revealing his frustration with an industry rewarding pretension over genuine screen presence. His conflicts established him as cinema's most unfiltered critic. Subscribe for more legendary behind-the-scenes feuds that shaped entertainment history.